Please call the medic, this beat came to me on a stretcher. In the lab, I step to the mic and feel like I'm Dexter. I'm a man, dark world, but I'm still shining like treasure. Yeah, I got joy like ha ha ha. Wait, and I can't wear smiles, that's fake. Then I'm between love and strong. Hate clock says no time for mistakes. Ring the alarm, sirens go off, but I'm calm. My life resides in his palm. Submit to my pops, respect for my mom. Honoring both, so my life will be long. Third time is the charm of the third strike. Had to.
What's going on, everybody? Hope everybody out there staying safe, staying out of trouble, being good to one another. Well, I'm sure everybody by now is probably well aware of this controversy behind this Jason Aldean song, Try That in a Small Town. I listened to it, and I've watched other people's reactions to it on both sides, some that agree with it and some that don't. And it's not trucking related, but I'm going to discuss this a little bit because I've lived in both. I grew up moving around, so I lived in both. You know, I went to school in Long Beach, California, and lived there for a while. New Orleans, Louisiana, lived there for a while. I'm originally from Port Lavaca, Texas, which is a small town. Lived there for quite a while. Houston, lived there for a long time, you know, when I was growing up. So I've got a feel for both, as some of you out there probably do as well. You've probably lived in both cities and small towns. Both of them have their benefits. Both of them have their disadvantages, right? We've all been in a small town at 9 o'clock at night when we realized we just smoked our last cigarette. The store's closed and the nearest store is 30 minutes away. I mean, we've all been there, right? But anyway, I think I'm going to give my personal opinion on this, and remind you, this is just my personal opinion, and that's all it is. It ain't nothing. I'm no expert. I'm no guru. It's just my own personal opinion. I think the people that are looking for racism and everything are racist themselves, and that's just my honest opinion. Because when you think on a certain level, if you think on certain terms, you're gonna see what you're thinking about all the time. You know, it's just like when someone's talking bad about somebody. If you'll just kick back and listen, most of the time they're telling you who they are more than they're telling you about who they're talking about. You know, that's why, you know, don't cut somebody off when they're talking bad about somebody. You ain't got to play with it and talk bad too, but just kick back and listen. You know, because most of the time they're going to be telling you who they are. You know, they're calling somebody a liar. They're calling somebody this. Most of the time they're telling you who they are. It's called projections, and psychology is what it's called. And, you know, real recognize real. That's a real statement. Real people recognize real people. But it goes the same way the other way. You know, scandalous people recognize scandalous people. Narcissists will recognize narcissists. Liars will recognize liars because they are one. You know, racist will recognize racist because they are one. You know, people that don't think in those terms, they don't see it. You know, like I listen to that song. I don't see racism in that song. I see community. I see how people in small towns probably feel. You know, I mean, I don't see racism. You know, I don't see lynching. I don't see what they're saying is in that song. Even when I listen to them narrate it, break it down and pick it apart and try to say this means that and that means that. Look, you can say whatever means whatever. We can get into that and go all day long. Whatever happened to what did he say? Why not just take it word for word for what he said? I mean, that's that. You know what I'm saying? And he didn't say anything that ain't true. You know, and I think that something, maybe city folk are listening to the song and they see it as a threat or something like that. Maybe that's the case. But that comes from a misunderstanding. So maybe we can clear that misunderstanding up a little bit. I know when I lived in a city, you have camaraderie, but it's different. Like when I lived in Long Beach, California, we had camaraderie. Like, it depended on what neighborhood you lived in and who you hung around with and all that kind of stuff. That was your camaraderie, and it was usually really small groups, you know, 8 to 10 people, you know, normally little small cliques. And that's who you ate with at school. That's who you hung out with. You know, that's you all played basketball together, played football in the street or whatever. It's usually small little cliques. But when you live in a small town, it's different. So like in Port Lavaca, I'm use it for example. I went to school there, a little bit in elementary school, a little bit in high school. And your whole town is one clique. You know what I'm saying? Port Lavaca's got like 12,000 people. It's not a really big town. But the whole town, everybody knows everybody. And if you don't know them, you know of them. You see so-and-so, you say, oh, that's so-and-so's grandson, or that's so-and-so's nephew, or whatever, right? You may not know them personally, but you know them. Everybody knows everybody, or they've heard of them at some point in time or another. But we had several schools that came to that high school, or several towns that came to that high school. You had Port O'Connor, they came to that high school. Seadrift, Tivoli, trying to think. Olivia was another town that came to that high school. Plus you had Port Lavaca, obviously, that came to that high school. So there were several towns. So in the mornings, the buses would come. You'd have the Port O'Connor bus. You'd have the Seadrift bus, which also had the Tivoli and Green Lake kids on it. You'd have the Olivia bus. And we grow up fighting. I mean, that's just what you do in a small town. You grow up fighting. Or we did back then. It's not like that anymore because there's a totally different generation out there now. And they don't fight like that. But when I was coming up, you grew up fighting. So it got so bad at some points that they had to schedule the buses out to stagger them. Because if the Port Lavaca kids were out there on the line when the Port O'Connor bus dropped off, it was going to be a fight. And we would fight town to town, which town was tougher. They called us Bay Rats. We're from Port Lavaca. They called us Bay Rats. So I mean, it depended on where you were at. And we had riots on the school grounds sometimes, and what we called riots. It'd just be a group of Port Lavaca kids fighting a group of Seadrift kids, or a group of Seadrift kids fighting a group of Port O'Connor kids, all the same county, just different towns. We used to do the same thing on the weekends. You got dance halls. We had the KC Hall down there in Port Lavaca. You could go to Victoria. You could go to Sun Valley Ranch, which ironically is a church now. It's not a dance hall anymore. You could go out towards Goliad, go out to Schrader Hall. There was another dance hall up in a little town called Inez. And on the weekends, we would purposely go to dance halls in other counties or other cities, other towns around us, knowing it was going to be a fight because they didn't want out-of-town kids there taking their girls. That's the way it was. So we would pile up in cars, man, it'd be 4 or 5 cars deep, and we'd go up to Victoria, go out to Sun Valley Ranch. Back then it was, SPM might be down there playing, and I don't really care for SPM anymore because of what he did, but SPM used to play there quite a bit because he had family from Victoria. SPM might be down there playing, and we'd be down there. And before the concert or dance or whatever is over, you were going to have the Port Lavaca kids fighting the Victoria kids. The Victoria kids trying to run the Port Lavaca kids out before the dance ended because they didn't want to share the girls. That's all it was. And it was that and a little bit of who's tougher, which town's tougher, and we'd get out there and fight till the death, man, to prove we were tougher than that other town. That's just the mentality of small towns, country folks, good old boys, or whatever, And when I hear that term, good old boy, I don't think of a racist term because you can be any race and be a good old boy. I've seen all races that would be considered good old boys in a small town. Good old boys just grow up different. I remember one time as a kid, I had done something stupid down at the little store that was right next to Wyatt's Barbecue. Can't remember the name of that store, and I don't even know if it's still there anymore. But the owner of the store held me up, and they got a hold of somebody, got a hold of my parents. That's a small town. Down come my parents. They're gonna whoop my butt right out there in the parking lot, make a fool out of me in front of the owner and everybody else, and then I'm gonna have to work for that owner for free to pay for whatever I did, right? That's a good old boy system. That's the way you're raised. That's the way you come up. And that's small town mentality. So yes, small towns are a lot more tight knit. They're a lot more together. A lot more, how to explain it? It's a larger group of people that are a lot more tight knit than in the city. Where in the city, most people, especially as you get older, most people are out for themselves. You can tell that driving down the highway in the city. I mean, most people are just out for themselves. They could care less. You can be their neighbor. They don't care. You know, cities are just not that tight knit. It's a dog eat dog world in the city. Every man for himself. So I think they're misunderstanding the song, because those are the terms that they think in. It's every man for themselves. You know, they're not going to get out there and defend their neighbor's house. Well, in a small town, a lot of neighbors will. They're going to get out there and defend that neighbor's house. That's such and such's grandma, or that's such and such's nephew. You know, so you got a little different environment in a small town. Now, with that being said, I'm going to say this. I like the song. I think Jason Aldean did a great job with it and all that kind of stuff. But I do believe it's dangerous what he did. Because what he did is entice people in the city to try that in a small town. So it's very possible that in the future, or near future, we may see people attempting that in a small town, which will get our friends and neighbors hurt, possibly. Or possibly get somebody in the city hurt. You know, because people in the city want to try to prove a point. You see what I'm saying? That's the only thing I see in that song that might be wrong. But anyway, I hope this kind of clears it up for people, kind of clarifies the song a little bit. If you haven't heard it, I'll leave a link to it down in the description. I'm sure most of y'all probably have. But I just think it's wild. I think it's wild that we got all this division out here today and everybody's looking for something wrong with somebody, you know. And I think it comes from the fact that a lot of people aren't working. A lot of people are choosing not to work. They don't have a life, so they got nothing but time to sit around. You got nothing but time to sit around. Your brain will get going on all kinds of crap that it shouldn't be going on, right? You know, you'll start seeing all kinds of things that aren't even there. Well, let's stop doing that. We can do a whole lot better in this country if we come together rather than if we stay divided. And that goes for the trucking industry as well, because we're divided just as much as any other group. And divided we'll fall. United we won't. So it's up to you what happens tomorrow. Y'all take care, stay safe, and keep trucking.